So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our moderator. Norma Elia Cantú recently served as the president of the American Folklore Society from 2020 to 2022 and holds the Murchison Professorship of the Humanities at Trinity University. Her research and creative writing have earned her an international reputation. Her most recent publications include the co-edited anthologies, Teaching Gloria Anzaldúa, Pedagogies and Practices for Our Classrooms and Communities, and meXicana Fashions, Politics, Self-Adornment, and Identity Construction, the novel Cabañuelas, and a poetry collection, Meditacion Fronteriza, Poems of Love, Life, and Labor. She has 2 forthcoming publications. She's also the busiest person in South Texas, FYI. She has 2 forthcoming publications, Fiestas in Laredo, puro Laredo, Matachines, Quinceañeras, and George Washington's birthday celebration, and the Folklorico Dance Tradition and US Latinx Communities. She is at work on a collection of poems tentatively titled Remedios. Next, we have Cloud Delfina Cardona is a poet and visual artist from San Antonio, Texas. Cardona is the author of What Remains, winner of the 2020 Host Publications Chapbook Prize. She is the co-founder of, this is always a tongue twister, Infrarealista Review, a literary nonprofit dedicated to publishing Texan writers. Cardona's poems can be found in Prairie Schooner, Los Angeles Review, The Boiler, Tinderbox, and more. And then we have, of course, Eddie Vega, the taco poet of Texas, who is, surprise, a poet, a storyteller, educator, and macondista. He is the author of Chicharra Chorus from Flower Song Press 2019 and recipient of the Literary Arts Grant from the Luminaria Artist Foundation. And last summer, he was named Best Local Poet by the San Antonio Current and won 2 major head-to-head haiku contests. Most recently, he's published a collection of poems written by South Texans entitled Asina is How We Talk. And I added the attitude because it's implied there. Vega hosts the Mouth Dakota Poetry Project, a bi-weekly open mic in San Antonio, Texas. And one thing I wanted to add is he's teaching a bilingual storytelling workshop tomorrow with the San Antonio Public Library. He will have another one in January if you're interested. And by the way, you can tell stories in Spanish and English and anything in between, and we don't have to translate. Last but definitely not least, we have Katie Gutierrez, the author of the national best-selling Edgar Award-nominated debut novel, More Than You'll Ever Know, which was also a Good Morning America Book Club selection. She is a National Magazine Award finalist whose essays and features have appeared in Time, Texas Highways, Harper's Bazaar, and more, and acknowledged in Best American Magazine Writing and Best American Essays. She has an MFA from Texas State University and lives in San Antonio, Texas with her husband and their 2 kids. She's also from Laredo. So without further ado.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would begin by acknowledging the spirits of this place that is Gemini Ink. That goes back 30 years. It wasn't always in this space, by the way. But Gemini Ink is a powerhouse here in San Antonio. I also would like to acknowledge all of our ancestors and ask permission from our ancestors for the work we are about to do. It is work, it is medicine, whenever we talk about literature. So con eso, we begin. I open the circle. And it is my honor to be the moderator for this panel. When I was contacted, I said, yes, of course. Am I in town? and that's not a joke, because I usually travel on weekends. So the first question that I would like everyone to delve into, change it a little bit. I was going to ask them to just talk a little bit. No, we're going to go right into the questions. How do you see the current state of publishing? Not just for Latinx, you want to do anything else, but specifically for yourselves. Self-publishing, small presses, big presses, plus and minuses. How do you see yourself in that world of publishing? And Cloud, you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to start.
Mike?
Thank you. Dramatic. Okay. So in terms of publishing, so as mentioned, my book What Remains was published by Post Publications in 2020, and they're a small press from Austin, started from Joe Bratcher.
Do you want to bring it back over here?
I think so. Yeah. I'll just go back to my McCollum teaching experience. So when I wanted to publish a book of my own poetry, I wanted to make sure it was with a publisher that, you know, supported Texan writers. That was crucial to me. So going with Host Publications, you know, it's a team of 2 people. They had a founder. And right now I feel like it's a really good moment for Texan authors and publishers. There's so many small presses. There's Deep Vellum. There's obviously Infra-Release Review, which I co-edit. There's Flower Song Press. You know, there's so many around Texas. And so I think right now in this state of publishing, at least in terms of DIY and small presses, it's a really exciting time. And also the internet helps as well. Kind of get the word out there with contests, with smaller publications, you know, regional presses. At large, you know, I did a fellowship with Macmillan last year, and I shadowed an editor from Flatiron Press, which was a direct result of the whole American Dirt catastrophe. They wanted to really push that emphasis on finding Latinx editors and voices. And so I shadowed her for about a year, and we would just call and talk about submissions and hearing that side of like the big, you know, publishers from New York. I always kind of felt outside of that, you know, being from South Texas, knowing so many friends, and my father, who's also a poet, in the audience. I have his book right here, and I have more books in my trunk, so see me afterwards. But like, you know, coming from San Antonio, seeing the communities that, you know, kind of thrived on self-publication and small presses that sometimes unfortunately would go defunct, I felt like it was really important to keep that spirit alive and provide more avenues for those voices. And at large, you know, I think as the statistics, you know, say, it's just, we're a tiny percentage, even though we make up such a large part of the artistic community, and to have our voices out there is so important. I think there's a lot of work to be done, but fortunately, I think there's a lot of small presses that are kind of doing the work that they need to do. Usually it's people that come from our communities that are creating those spaces, you know, and pushing our voices out there. There's a long legacy of that with like Third Woman Press, and, you know, it's to keep that going, I feel like is important, even if we don't get into the big publishers all the time, just to have those spaces is sacred.
Yeah, you're so right. The Chicano movement was the place where a lot of these small presses were publishing our voices, because obviously the New York established presses were not interested in our voices. But in addition to that, the tradition goes back even more to the early 20th century, when in the early 1900s, our community had many newspapers, many kind of off-prints where they would print poetry, and they would print our stories. So it's a long-standing indie press tradition that you're a part of. So thank you so much. Eddie, you want to tackle the question from your perspective? Sure. How do you see the current state of publishing industry in terms of Latinx authors, and especially maybe self-publishing versus small presses versus big presses?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I guess it's a very sobering statistic, the one that Florinda said, because as a poet, as an artist, I hang out with other poets and artists, and I see that they have books on the shelf. So I'm like, oh, everybody does must have a whole lot of them. Now I can go to Half Price Books and find friends on the shelf, and that's kind of cool. But then to realize that no, it's only a small percentage, and so my viewpoint is kind of clouded by that. I think there's more contests, and that's where people get published. The self-publishing is being done, but I don't think it's being done well. No, frankly, I think that a lot of people think, well, I can do it. I can just go to Amazon.com and publish my own book. but then they don't have an editor. They don't have somebody to look it over with for them. They don't really know how to put cover art together. There's a whole lot that goes into publishing a book that we aren't training on or we aren't being trained on, right? I think mentorship is very, very important. My first publication was piggybacked. You know, somebody, Claudia's dad, Jesse, sent a poem that he was sending his poem. He sent one of mine with him. And another time, Carmata Foya sent a poem of mine and got into a book because she was sending hers. So I think that's very, very important. Is the networking is very, very important. And one of the, we talked about the big presses in New York. We don't have representation over there, so they're not going to see our stuff. And when we do, it's Greater Latinx Publishing. So they're going to say, okay, well, we have to have one Cuban, one Dominican, one Puerto Rican, and one Mexican. And Mexican Americans actually make up the largest percentage of population of Latinx people. But in New York, it's the smallest percentage. So again, we're not going to have representation. So we can't be looking to New York. We have to look to places in the Southwest, places in Texas, places in other communities where they're being published, like these presses that I've mentioned. So contests, I think that covered all of it. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, and that gives me an opportunity also as we segue to Katie to talk about the differences with the small presses and the self-publishing. I just met for breakfast with a friend, and she self-publishes. She doesn't put things out there. She doesn't send them to be rejected. She says she just self-publishes. And for now, that is fulfilling what she wants. She doesn't want to have like a huge audience. She wants to give the books to her friends and family. That's fine. And she is a really good editor, so she takes care of that. But the design and all the other aspects of the book, yeah, you would need somebody who has a degree maybe, or at least experience working with design and thinking about the fonts and what's accessible and how it works and how it looks on the page and all those matters that when you're writing alone, by your computer, you're not thinking about that. That's somewhere else. Katie, what is your answer to this first question?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that because I used to work as an editor at we called it a boutique storytelling company, and it was essentially a self-publisher that we would help clients write books from start to finish. They were mostly nonfiction, and we would pair those clients with a team of writers and editors, and over the course of a year, we would help them through this really in-depth interview process to write their books, and the writers all got credit, which was what I really loved about the company and kind of differentiated it from ghostwriting. We hired graphic designers and formatters, and the books were really beautiful, really high quality. But what we discovered over and over again was that without an additional massive marketing budget, which our clients didn't have, and neither did we, the books were really unseen. And so clients would go through a pretty big financial investment, to hire the company to write their book was a huge emotional investment, a time investment. And then at the end, they had this beautiful product in their hands that nobody knew about. And so I think that is a real problem with self-publishing, assuming you do want to, sell more copies than to just your friends and family who know about it. So that was what I wanted to add to that. My novel, it's my debut novel, so it's my only book-length publishing experience that is mine and not client-related, and that is with a big publisher in New York, which was William Morrow. It's an imprint of HarperCollins. And yeah, so everything that Cloud and Eddie have said is completely true in terms of the staggering lack of representation. And one thing that like a statistic that I think is very unsurprising is that in addition to only 7% of books being published by Latinx people, only about 7% of publishing professionals are Latinx, right? And then, like Eddie was saying, you kind of divide it even less, and how many are Mexican American, right, representing our communities. So I think that is a really direct reflection of the small number of Latinx books that are acquired. They might be seeing a lot of books of quality, but when there are only so few voices who share these community spaces, that presents a major obstacle.
In my experience, so my book that was published, More Than You'll Ever Know, was not the first book I went on submission with. I went on submission in 2017, and that book did not sell, so I had to get back to work. But both times, I think the first time we went on submission, we sent it out to 40 editors, not a single one was Latinx. And then the second time we sent it out to 30 for More Than You'll Ever Know, and only one was Latinx at Flatiron. And so I think, and the entire publishing experience I've had, nobody that I've worked with has been Latinx in any way. So I think that really demonstrates the dearth that we're looking at when it comes to the big publishers, which is depressing when you consider, I also follow a lot of Latinx bookstagrammers, and they're really great about recognizing every Tuesday the new books that come out, the Latinx books that come out. And the thing that I notice over and over again is that there are typically like 1 to 6 books every Tuesday by Latinx authors in every genre, being published by New York publishers. And in some ways, if you just look at that, it's like, oh wow, that's exciting. Every week we have these new books, by people in our community. On the other hand, it's like, well, hundreds of books are published every week. Like, why are these the only ones across all genres? So yeah, I think being in it has been really eye-opening as far as how far we've come, I think, in some regards. I've been really fortunate in that my publishing team has been incredibly supportive of not just Latinx voices, but diverse voices as a whole. And I think that it's moving in some right directions, but I think that overall, there is still a really long way to go.
Absolutely. You're kind of already answering our next question, but before we go there, I would like to add that I don't publish either, any of these indie or major publishers. I do university presses. All my creative work has come out of university presses, and that's a different animal, any way you want to see it. First of all, the submission press, they don't require an agent, so I've never had an agent, whereas the others would. I also don't have to work kind of with a team. I have like one person, and then the copy editor is contracted, so it's no one there. So it's a different, each venue, I guess, is different how you approach it. As a writer, I prefer that, but I could probably work with independent and with my major ones, because really the core is your work, and all these other elements of the work are trying to get it out there, to get it published, to get it sold, and in the hands of readers. So the next one is kind of how difficult was your experience? And you've already kind of answered that, both obstacles and breakthroughs. You said the first one was rejected and over, and you said, okay, time to get back. What happened to that manuscript?
It's still in the drawer. Yeah, we'll see. Maybe one day. But
yeah, don't despair. My second novel from a university press, I turned it in, and it came back and said, you have to rework this. This is 2 books. I put it away for 10 years. And then I came back and I said, you know what? They were right. It's 2 books. And I pulled them apart and created one of the 2 books. I haven't done the other one. But sometimes the editors or the people who are rejecting the work are actually helping you to make it better. So don't despair.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think ultimately, as devastating as it was at the time to have come so close, and then have the door shut, I'm ultimately really glad that was not my debut novel, because I think that now I look at it and I see it needed a lot of work, and none of the editors could agree on exactly what that work was. And so I think that if I do decide to go back to it, it's like a complete take it apart, start over. More generally, so I have both a journalism background and a fiction background. The journalism was by complete chance. I was looking for any internships I could find in college that had to do with writing. So I interned first at a literary publicity firm in Austin, and then at People magazine in Austin. And that People was my senior year, and they offered me a job afterwards for $10 an hour. And I was so excited. And so I took it. The bureau closed 6 months later, and and it was like an incredibly short notice. The editors, like in New York, shut down 6 bureaus with 2 weeks notice. Everyone was furious. And so I kind of went from having this brand new job to then being like, well, now what? So I started freelancing, and at the time I was responding to every Craigslist ad for writing gigs. So, you can imagine some of them were not that legit. And so, but that was how my journalism got started, was just by finding jobs on Craigslist and Guru.com, other, kind of journalism boards. And I wrote for community impact newspaper and trade magazines, or really anywhere that would let me write, I wrote for them. And I wrote marketing copy. I proofread, books, fiction and nonfiction. I developmentally edited books. So I really got this kind of education in all of these different ways to make a life as a writer. In the middle of that, I decided to go back to my MFA. So I did that, continued freelancing. And then after the MFA, one of my major freelance clients offered me this job as the editor that I mentioned earlier. So I did that for 5 years until it was kind of clear that I wasn't writing any of my own fiction anymore. And the only books I was reading were my clients' books. So I decided to kind of take a year off. I was in the very fortunate position that we were able to live off my husband's income, and he was very supportive. And I was like, okay, 1 year, that's what I'm gonna give myself to write a book. Fast forward 7 years, and it's like, that's when my book actually sold. And so, it's a lot of rejection. I will say, so my first, I think, fiction publication came from Angie Goose, because at the time she had just started a literary journal called Asterix. And one of my teachers in the MFA program was Nelly Rosario, and she really loved one of my stories. And she said, you know what, you should send it to Angie. She's just started this magazine. I'd never heard of Angie at the time. And so I sent it to her, and she published it. And then years later, now I'm like, I hero worship her. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was my first publication. But Angie is such a really good example of somebody who extends out into the Latinx writing community and shares opportunities. She's really kind of built a community both in New York and virtually. And I think that is part of what we need, as Latinx writers trying to make it, whether it's in big publishers or self-publishers or small presses, sharing those resources like that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, sharing the resources and mentoring, which I think you mentioned, Betty. So what is your experience? Any obstacles, any breakthroughs?
Oh, sure, lots of obstacles. And some breakthroughs. But it's like dating. You're gonna put yourself out there and you're gonna get rejected. So it happens, right? And you have to be like okay with it. And put all the contests that I didn't win, the submissions that they said, no, this is not a right fit for us, or we're sorry we can't put your poems in our poems can't be placed in art. They made me feel like my poems were homeless, is what they did, the way they wrote it. So they're very nice ways to do it. And then I was on the other side, because when I put together Así es How We Talk, which is a collection of 25 poets from South Texas, and I had some very, very, and it's because of a grant, I had a very specific ask of what could be in that book. And it had to be new work, had to be South Texas based, or from a South Texas based artist, and had to be in Spanglish in some way. And I sent out a call. I'm like, I need your poem, so anybody can submit. And I put it through Facebook, I put it through Twitter, I made emails, I let people know that I have this call for submissions. And I didn't get a whole lot. And then the ones that I did get, some of them I had to say, I'm sorry, but we can't put that in here. So now I was on the other side. Yeah, it's like this doesn't fit. And then I had to be on the, one of those persons actually emailed me and said, well, how are you, the arbiter or whatever? I'm like, well, I'm the editor. I just didn't respond at all because I thought that. But so that happened too. And then after I was also on the other side now of trying to get it published. And I sent the manuscript to some university presses, and I think 2 of them said no. One of them said no, but said it really well, and told me that it needed to be expanded and that it was too activistic. And I was okay with that last part. I'm like, and but that they'd still be interested. And so, maybe later I have another book coming out, and it's gonna be a little bit larger than this one. So anyway, so there was a bridge, and then I went with Flower Song, which was also published my previous book. So that was easy. And like I said, the networking is important. My editor is a friend, has become a friend. I'm sorry, my publisher has become a friend. We walk around Seattle together at Edward P. So he's good people. Edward Vidario. That I think is also important, is that people bring you along in some way. And you mentioned people that would ask or search for you when you're networking, when you're out there, when you're doing that fellowship somewhere, when you're doing that week away at the conference or whatnot. You're meeting people who will also eventually become editors and publishers, who might say, I'm going to have a short story published, and it's not going to be in this month, which I don't have short stories published. This will be the first one. And it's because of somebody that I met when I was as a residency in Maine, who reached out and said, hey, I really like your stuff. I need one of your works, right? So that really matters to have those connections out there.
Bob? And Claude, well, the same question about obstacles and breakthroughs, but also maybe I mentioned mentorships, as that seems to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Oops.
Delicate. Yeah. So in terms of mentorship, so I work as an editor with Infra-Release the Review, and basically that just started as a project when I was at the MFA program in Texas State. We, were like one of, 5 Latinx people in the entire program. And so we immediately just connected with each other. And we were looking around to other publishers and places, and we noticed these mastheads on these journals all looked very the same, but would ask for calls for we want BIPOC writers, and it's I guess to check off we're diverse, we have diverse writers. And so we were we don't want to do that. We also don't want to just be elitist and be oh, if you have an MFA, you're a better writer, because that was not always the case in workshops. So we wanted to have diversity in there. We wanted to have high school dropouts next to someone with a PhD. We wanted to have just all types of voices, really. And so as an editor, you kind of recognize, I try to keep this in mind, that everyone's taste is so subjective. What I like is very different from what my co-editor likes. And so when I'm sending out stuff as well, I have to remember okay, everyone's taste is so different. There's no good or bad, every journal, every editor has different influences and different tastes. So, and in addition to mentorship too, I think because the publishers are so central to New York and there's no big publisher down here, I think having mentorship, having those opportunities, and editorial work is important too. And poetry as well. With Infra-Release the Review, we've taken in some high school students and give them editorial work. One of my students at McCollum, we gave her 3 poems, what do you like about them? And I never had anything like that during my high school experience. And I think just having those opportunities is really important. So that's something that we're really focused on. And I feel it's necessary because the statistics say, there's only so many editors that are Latinx. When I did my fellowship, they were we would really like to pair you with a Latinx editor, but we don't have any. So it was I learned a lot and I loved my mentor, but it would be cool because that's rare, but also, that person probably is bogged down with 100 other things, because then you become the spokesperson of that, of that industry. And so people are giving you all of these things that you have to do typically for free. So yeah, I think just that's a really big emphasis, I feel. And the networking, like you said, we started IR because we kind of just wanted our friends to have a space to come together and also make art and publish each other as well. A lot of the collectives, throughout history did that. They published each other's friends. They created events to spark creativity. And a lot of the friends that we have, we all came from the MFA program. Mostly they're brown and queer, and we're let's all get together and just kind of emphasize the importance of art. And we're super excited to announce that we're gonna publish my friend Dee's book, Dee Garcia's from Laredo. And it's all essays about
just different facets of like Mexican American culture and like Laredo core, as we're calling it. And he has this amazing essay that is all about the like tongue sound that you hear in the belly. Yeah, all of that. And so put that on your radar in the future. But like stuff like that is important, and I'm really excited to publish that. So yeah.
And again, we're kind of been touching on some of these questions already about the publishing industry, what has helped you navigate that and what has not helped you navigate through all these muddy waters of publishing. But in addition to that, if you could probably also talk about what would you like to see in the publishing, how would you like to see Latinx publishing move forward with some of the things that have happened to you, obviously, you want to make better, and you're already doing that. So maybe you can start us with that.
Sure. Yeah, I think, me and my father talk about it sometimes, and my friends too, just like the pressure that you put on yourself as someone who's marginalized. You're like, oh, like people are going to look to me and see my voice as the ultimate voice on this culture or subculture, and kind of taking that pressure off and I don't know, like sharing like messy narratives, things that are not like so black and white. Like, I think that's really important. Experimental work. I forget what writer pointed it out, but they talked about like how a lot of the experimental writing that we have is like mostly done by women of color, which is interesting because you kind of like have to navigate like, how do I fit in this form? How do I not fit? And so I think like just seeing more work like that, just work that's like, yeah, like I think messy ultimately is what I'm looking for. And I think we're like on the way there. And, we have a lot of good presses in Texas that are sharing those narratives. So I think continuing that and uplifting, doing PR, giving them good covers, graphic design, like all of that is super important.
Thank you. How about you, Eddie?
I think I hope I don't upset anybody here, but I think in the past, there was some possessiveness of being the one that was published. And if I'm the one that's being published, then I want all the attention on me and can't have somebody else share that spotlight because then I won't get published again, right? So there's a lot of gatekeeping, I think. And I think now it's kind of like the door got open and now we got to hold it. Just like, we're being nice, like in Texas. Hold the door open for somebody else to come through too, right? So we do that. When I did Asina, I didn't get enough good submissions and I had to like go out and actually email people and say, hey, I need a poem from you, right? So that's also part of that is like, let's, Tomas Castillo, he goes by Rain or Shine as a slam poet. He's a slam poet. He doesn't publish because slam poets don't usually publish. They might have an album or a CD or something, but they don't publish. And I was like, your poem needs to be in this book. He's like, well, I'm not sure if I could do that. I don't know how to write a poem, like actually like an actual poem. Like we'll help you. Let's help you. Let's put that together and let's work it. Let's edit it a little bit and put it on the page. So I think there needs to be more of that, more of this like not being possessive and helping each other out. But then also, I get encouraged to put books together. And if I'm putting a book together for other people, then I'm not being a poet myself. And that kind of hurts too, because I want to be writing. I don't always want to be the one who's anthologizing people. I mean, it's fun and it's great. But what about my needs, right?
Great question. How about you?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's not working.
No, it's not. I don't think I project as well as everybody else.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, completely agree with everyone else. I think community is so important. I tend to be naturally a little more like introverted. And so when I first started, I guess, going out and doing events like this and meeting more writers, the idea of networking is like really painful because it feels so transactional. It feels like everybody is, sort of how can you be useful to me? But I found in these last few years and really before Elon Musk broke Twitter that I think that there is so much community to be found. So for me, when I had my first child in 2017 and the second in 2020, so very much in the midst of writing my book. And I was like breastfeeding in the middle of the night and like very lonely. The pandemic hit. And I ended up just finding a lot of community on Twitter by, you know, reading people's work and commenting on people's work and, you know, sliding into those DMs. And, you know, a lot of friendships were formed that way. My writing group, you know, formed that way. We talk every day. We send each other work, you know, and it feels very much, and we're all sort of in similar places of our careers where we can sort of talk about these various publishing challenges that I think can be really hard to navigate by yourself, you know, from the, I guess, traditional publishing perspective, things like, you know, I'm waiting for my agent to get back to me on work, you know, like it's been a week. Does she hate it? What do I do in the meantime? You know, or I haven't heard anything from my publisher about marketing, but they're really prioritizing this other book. You know, does that mean that they're not going to support mine at all? And how should I talk to them about it? So all of those things that, you know, again, it goes back to resource sharing. It goes back to, you know, helping each other through those times. I think in terms of like the internal atmosphere of traditional publishing, I really feel like in order to get more Latinx publishing professionals and to open that gate, publishing has to become decentralized from New York. You know, New York is so expensive. I think in order for people to start working in publishing, you know, it's completely unrealistic for most people unless they're going to live in a tiny apartment with 8 other people and have another job, you know, or they come from, you know, a very financially secure background, right? I think it's one or the other. And I think that's just not possible for so many people of color and so many Latinx, you know, people who want to go into publishing. So I think that, and the pandemic should have shown us that we can work virtually, you know, that we don't have to be tied to this office. But I feel like in order to see, I think the change that I would like to see in traditional publishing, I think it has to start inside by doing stuff like that, by doing mentorships in publishing houses, by really prioritizing this in a different way. And then I think also as readers, that we have to really show our support for these books, you know, whether it's big press, small press, university presses, that we are responsible for saying, you know, we have an appetite for these stories, you know, like you can't get away with publishing just one a year and we give you credit for that, you know, like we want more and we'll support more and we'll buy them or we'll borrow them from the library, or we'll listen to them. But I think that's where readers have power as well. You know, sharing it on social media, if that's your thing, I think is really powerful. So yeah, I think leaning in those directions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because the library is a good source, and also the cost of living in New York for sure. But I'm trying to imagine what it would look like to have a decentered publishing industry. I can't. It's so ingrained in the nature of things and the way things. However, we've always managed to get around it. M&A Editions was here in San Antonio, oh gosh, for about 20, 30 years. It was just in their home. Está Angela de Hoyos and her husband. They just did it because there wasn't any other way. And I think now with the DIY that you can do your own and you can create your own, I think that's why we see more publishing venues here in Texas, because Conocimiento Press, Josie Mendez Negrete, Aslan Libre Press. I mean, just in San Antonio, in the last 10 years, we have like maybe 8 or 9 new presses doing work and putting the work out there. So I think you're right. There's a renaissance. There's coming back to doing it ourselves. The other question, and I'm going to kind of switch it a little bit because it's about building pipelines. First into the major publishing houses, which we've already talked about a little bit. And the other is the authors themselves. I mean, MFA programs are great, but I'm glad that you're publishing people who don't have MFAs, because there are many people writing who don't have MFAs and are brilliant writers. So you have to, on some level, acknowledge that those writers and give them a place to publish. But is it even a possibility for us to envision a world where we don't need an MFA, where we really value the story, the writing, all of the other things that are there in our community, Latino and Latina? We have a storytelling tradition. It's very rich. We know people who can tell stories that are, I mean, not just the spoken word poets, but people just from the community. I can give you so many examples walking into Danny's in Laredo, and we're celebrating a birthday. He said, "Para un viejito," and he's letting out this wonderful, beautiful poem because it's in our culture, it's in our communities. So I guess the question is, how do we build these pipelines, and how do we nurture them? Can we see that? Is it even a possibility that can happen? I'm gonna start with you because you've always gone in the middle. So
okay.
the middle child, right?
I'm not sure how. I mean, that's a big ask to decentralize and build a new pipeline. But I think that you're right. We have a long tradition, and we also have a long tradition just in our literary history in this country or around the world of not having MFAs. All those classic art authors that you think of, they some of them didn't even have degrees at all, right? And if they did, it was like in history or something, or economics, business people. William Carlos Williams was a doctor. Those they're not MFA. I think the MFA, and I don't have one, and I think I would like to have had one. But I think that where it helps is not really in the writing so much as in the other job, because you can't just work off your writing. You're gonna have to do something else like teach. With the MFA, you can teach at the college level, or you can edit, or do those other things, and that's why the MFA I think is important. But of course, there's an elitism to the MFA, and I know is when you go somewhere, people sometimes it's their first question, right? Where did you get your MFA? And to the writers that don't have one, it's like, what do you say, right? Because on one side you want to be like, oh, I don't have one yet. On the other side you want to be like, F you, right? So it's kind of a little balance, to it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, like you said, like some of the best writers that we've ever had don't have MFAs. And ultimately, in my time in the program, they didn't teach us how to get published at all. They didn't talk about it at all. Like, there was no conversation about that. And with poetry, like most people don't have agents. It's mostly contest driven, or you just send it out to publishers. With fiction, it's a little bit different, but even our fiction writers, I think we had one person come in from Alice James Books, like in our last year, to talk about it. That was like a one-day thing. But aside from that, like, it's kind of just like this mystical thing that no one really talks about. And so I don't remember what your question was, but I remember pipeline. And I think, yeah, pipelines, generally not good associations with the word, but I think in terms of like creating networks, across the country outside of New York, after my fellowship, my editor told me like, you have the skills and knowledge to get a job as a assistant editor. And then I looked at the salary and it was like $35,000, and I was like, and you have to live in New York, obviously. And then she was saying like, oh yeah, I don't read in my spare time because I'm just busy reading the manuscripts like all of the time. And then all of your social life is around like the publishing events. So it's like, it's just all consuming. So it's not very like accessible for a lot of people. So I think there are ways, and I think we, like Norma said, there are ways, and we have created those ways throughout history to get published, to share stories. And through building that community throughout Texas, throughout the Southwest, I think it's possible. I think it's just a matter of persistence. That makes the biggest difference, I feel, is just let's show up, let's keep on going.
Here, persistence, tenacity. Writers who publish need to have that, definitely. And also hacer concha. What I mean by that is have a hard shell, so the rejection doesn't hurt. It's not about you.
Right.
And yeah.
Your answer.
Yeah, I think also, like Cloud said, same exact experience for me in the MFA program. There was zero talk of how to actually get published, from literary magazines to small presses, to getting an agent, to traditionally publishing, to all of these different avenues. Like, it just wasn't talked about. It was almost like tawdry is the vibe I got. Like we were there for the art, we were there for the craft, we weren't there for the business. And then I think, you get out of the program and what do you do? You know, everyone figures everything out by themselves, or if they're lucky through mentorship or in the community. And so I think that we need to have more community programs like this at Gemini Ink, you know, programs that really work to make it not this elite thing, to make it not a problem to talk about business, to talk about, you know, the money aspects of publishing. Like, even in these last few years, you know, publishing is such an opaque industry. And I only know one small part of it, which is my own experience. And I think it's probably similar for most of us who are published. And so I think that if we could expand, you know, community programs for people who do and don't have MFAs and help to demystify the many avenues toward getting published, you know, that could be some level of pipeline to these different avenues.
Absolutely, community programs, and I'm thinking of Macondo. One of the things we didn't do in 23, we are hoping to do in 24, is have community workshops. We have 40 writers from across the country here in San Antonio. Wouldn't it be beautiful to have them out there teaching? At least a morning workshop or something. So we're gonna be working on that, because that is one way to create a pipeline. You grow your own. You grow your own writers, you grow your own editors, you grow your own publishers, book designers, all of it. So yeah. The last question is, what is the value of us telling our own stories? I think we all know that. So I'm going to change it a little bit. So what is the value to you to tell your own story, to be able to be a writer? I've been writing since I was 7 or 8 years old. So it's not an option. You just write. But what about you? How does it work?
Yeah, I've also been writing since I was in 3rd grade, was when I decided I wanted to be a writer. When that was the first kind of short story I wrote for a school assignment, and it was sort of all over for me from there. But I think that we've all had the experience of having somebody tell a story about us that isn't exactly accurate. And we're like, no, that's not how it happened. That's not where it happened. You're telling it wrong. Let me tell it. And that's how it feels, I think, when you read a book that, like American Dirt, right? You know, that is told by an outsider attempting to be an insider into this community. I think that our communities are so rich and so varied, and down to the family level, right? Like, even families have their own ways of talking to each other and ways of loving each other and being, and there's no one way to represent Latinidad or Mexican Americanness or South Texanness. And so because of that, we all need to tell our stories, because who else?
Great answer.
For me, is that there was a story in 7th grade by Santa Cisneros, and then I think that was the only one I can remember being written by somebody that looked or sounded like me. And I think our kids need more of that. I think that's the reason why we put that stuff out there. More videos of performances, more short stories being written, more novels out there, so that when they're on the reading list, you know, that summer reading list for school, it's kind of look like. I'm really proud that at my school they read They Call Me Güero. That was on their list. I'm like, yeah, I know that guy. Right, so just stuff like that. Kahneman's latest book, I think, is going to be on. Going to be on a few lists, and that's great. Let's have more out there to inspire the next generation of writers.
Yeah, I mean, just like Katie said, there's so many different experiences, and my experience, grew up in San Antonio, mostly just into art, and was pretty quiet, didn't speak Spanish. Was into like film and David Lynch and like all these different things. And I didn't really see that reflected in stories that I read that were supposed to represent me. And so I think I was like, well, I just need to create poems that, are about my experiences, and maybe someone will relate to them. And that's like the goal. Even if one person relates, that's the goal always. So.
And I'm sure we're relating to all of you. So do you have any questions or comments? We would love to engage in a plática.
I have a question, Dr. Cantú. First of all,
Do you want to stand up, Jonathan?
Sure,
Do you want just so
absolutely.
everyone can hear
Sure.
you? Yeah.
I was wondering, could you speak to just a little bit on like incorporating Spanish or other non-English languages into your writing, and in terms of like publishing, and if I don't know a publisher's expectation have ever sort of conflicted with yours, and how you sort of navigate that. Also goes to I think the issue of like audience, and maybe trying to get a broad audience as opposed to maybe it's just a South Texas audience.
Yeah.
Navigating that.
When Calicula came out in '95, I had to find the publisher, and it was a University Press, University of New Mexico. What helped me was that an Anglo, he just published a novel about Texas and had Spanish in it and didn't translate it. And so I said, if you can, why can't you do that for me? And so that helped. Just getting it out there is already a resistance in some way. I don't know who wants to take this one.
So I have an entire book that's in Spanish,
Yes.
right? On purpose, and it's for that very purpose, because there isn't. And then the other thing is that we get othered in our language, in our culture too, but in our language. So there are no italics in this book, because that's usually what you do with other languages. Is like you separate it out, you put in italics. And I said no, because I got tired of that. I got tired of being othered, of trying to write for a whole group of people. I'm like, no, I'm gonna write it for myself, and you have to understand it. Right, and maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe it's your reason for trying to go learn something else about another language or another culture. And I think that's important. One of my poet friends, Alex Liu, out in California, does amazing poetry. He has one great poem about his mother's language, about Chinese. There's Chinese in the poem. I saw him do this in a room full of people in San Antonio that did not know a lick of Chinese. But he's so authentic to himself that it was a very, very powerful experience. And I think we do that too. So as long as we're authentic to ourselves and our own voice and our own culture, then, people will read it. And they'll translate it. It translates it.
Yeah, so to me, the book More Than You'll Ever Know is told with by two protagonists, two narrators. One of them is Gloria Rivera, who lives in Laredo. And to me, there was no way of writing Lore without including Spanish and the very specific syntax of Laredo and these kind of like idiosyncratic ways of incorporating Spanish and English together. And I also didn't italicize it because I didn't want that sense of the I snags on it. It snags, it calls it out as something else, something that doesn't quite belong there, and I didn't want that. I was very lucky that my agent and my editor never questioned it. I think we're in a moment in time where we can do that more. I think even just a couple of years ago, the tradition or the convention was to still italicize. That said, a lot of the more negative reviews I get are because of the Spanish, and I'm like, I don't really care. Because it's not that hard. It's just not that hard to use context clues, to use Google Translate. I don't know what to tell these reviewers. I think it's worth, if you're going to be including another language in your work, it's worth knowing that there will be pushback at some level, most likely. But I've never regretted it, and I'll be doing it again. I think it's really important to see our languages represented. It's not, and again, it's not as if every Mexican American person in South Texas speaks Spanish, right, or speaks it in the same ways. It's such a spectrum. So that's something that I want to represent as well, because that's very interesting to me. But
yeah, and readers need to do a little bit of work. And if we can do the work reading a text that has French in it, why can't they do it for Spanish? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think they both said it perfectly, but I guess I'll add in terms of audience. I think there's sometimes the worry that like, oh, well, only the people in San Antonio or Laredo are going to understand this specific reference. But something that my father always tells me, and that I've heard, repeated by other great authors too, is the universal is in the particular. So it's like the more specific you are, people are going to relate to it. They might not have the exact experience, but they're going to, relate to that one detail about your grandma,
Definitely. Any other questions? Yes.
So I heard you say earlier, like, there will be rejection, don't take it personal. I'm curious though, and this is for any of you that may want to answer this, but are there works that you have stronger attachment to, like maybe on a more personal level? And how do you manage that as far as how you choose the publisher, right? And then knowing maybe that there's a chance it's not going to be chosen, or if it straight up gets rejected, like has that happened to you? How do you navigate that? And I guess self-preservation.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, when I was in graduate school, I was at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Prairie Schooner is published there. And I was like, okay, am I going to submit stuff to them? Because they're right there. It's my friends, right? And it was really scary. And yeah, I got rejected the first time. And it was kind of tricky. And then I did translations, and those got accepted, which taught me one thing. Of course, it's a white institution. Everybody there is white. They don't speak Spanish. They were not really rejecting me. They were rejecting what they didn't know. Mm-hmm. But they knew the name Alfonsina Storni, major Latin American writer, so they accepted those. And that was an eye-opener. The other rejections, yeah, I try not to send things where I don't think they're going to be accepted. And you can kind of tell, like your friends submitting to Asina who didn't write in Spanglish or from South Texas. I mean, it's going to get rejected because that's not what the book is about.
I mean, I think I've been rejected so much, from the short stories at the beginning to the first personal essays I tried to publish to the first more journalistic pieces to my first book. I couldn't even begin to count how many times I've been rejected. And I think every piece has been personal. I think it's about, really using rejections to ask yourself questions about the work. I think that there are absolutely times when, maybe you're sending a work that's not ready and you're sending it to the New Yorker and they're saying no. And it's like, well, I could have probably seen that coming, but I think that if you've done the research and you're sending work to places that you think are a genuinely good fit and it's still getting rejected, then I think there's an opportunity to, if you haven't yet, ask other people in your community to read it, to give feedback, to go back to the work, to set it aside for a little while and then come back and see if it reads differently to you or see if there are new opportunities for where to publish it. So I don't think rejection has to be the end. I think often it is, and often, at least for me, it should be. A lot of my stuff that has been rejected should have gotten rejected. And I think that it taught me how to be a better writer, and very much so, well, both fiction and nonfiction. But I think I learned fast, how to write pieces that magazines in particular would be interested in picking up. And I think that it can be similar for fiction in terms of like really being able to analyze like where in what ways might this piece be failing, right? But also being able to say, okay, I'm really happy with this. This is the piece I want to put into the world. This rejection is subjective. That means it's not the right fit for it. So where else can I look to place it? So I think it's tough to kind of differentiate between those things, but you get better and better at it as you go on.
My first method is to say, when I get the rejections, well, so I was scared. I didn't want to be in there anyway. and then I brush that off a little bit because I have a lot more things that actually is not a lot more, but I have a lot of stuff that actually is accepted and that is published and it's out there. So when I get rejected, I'm like, but I have this other thing, So that kind of like it's a little bit more reassuring that way. And as far as things that you're really tied to, and I don't, with poetry, I might be tied to a piece that I think is really, really good. It's very, very personal, and then somebody doesn't like it. And what I found is that that's okay, because I'm going to put that into a book with a bunch of other poems, and then somebody else might appreciate it. So I have a poem in my book that was rejected by Poetry magazine, but it's in my book, and I had somebody come to me and say, "Oh, I love this one." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Then it found its home.
Yeah, speaking of rejections from Poetry magazine, I just got one yesterday for a poem I'm personally obsessed with called Theas, all about like different Theas and it's a list. And I've read it at, several open mics and people love it. They come up to me. So I'm like, yeah, this is good. And then when I got the rejection, I was like, I don't want to be in there anyway. They don't appreciate it, so it's fine. But no, I mean, it's hard. Like the rejection, seeing that little like email, it's like,
Pops up, it ruins your day.
yeah, you see it, and but sometimes, I mean, like, you know, I've definitely had the experience of like, oh, this is so good, I'm gonna submit it right away, and then I'll look back at it 3 months later, I'm like, no, this is not good, this is not it. So sometimes it's a good thing, you know, and I think Rilke is the one who says, put like a poem in a drawer and put it away for like 8 years or something. Don't look at it. Maybe not that long, but like maybe like 8 weeks or something, then come back to it. Because sometimes all it needs is like time to just kind of cook and sit. So it's often the beginning, and just like, I mean, the more you get rejections, the easier it becomes. Sometimes, you know, just kind of aim like, I'm gonna get 50 rejections this year. Sometimes
I have to say that when we used to get rejections in the mail, like an envelope, you would leave it there for a while. Because you didn't know if it was an acceptance or a rejection. And now you get it on an email, you can't not see it. It has changed. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Basically, this is speaking towards your comments on speculative future where the publishing industry has been decentralized from its central nexus in New York right now. It sounds like from a lot of your comments to the panel is that there's already sort of system within a system in place, sort of scaffolding network of independent brown writers and voices within the publishing industry. I guess my question is going forward to sort of achieve that speculative future of decentralized publishing. Well, I parallel it with what happened, well, what somebody told me happened in 1972 city council elections here in San Antonio with the Committee for Biopedagoggy. After there was a schism where people disagreed over whether or not they should work within the current political system to enact change, or create their own, or stick with their own separate party to enact change from without. So from your perspectives, is that a potential pitfall going forward? And is there one way better than the other, or a combination of the two?
That's an excellent question, because you're paralleling it with the political process, which in the Chicano movement, absolutely. I mean, that was the choice. We create our own. Forget New York. We're going to do our own publishing. We're going to do our own everything, movimiento, right? I'm not sure that works anymore, partly because of the internet and the technology that has changed the way things go. And now with AI, even more so. But on the other hand, I want to let everybody answer. From my perspective, it is something that is ongoing and it's recursive. It comes in waves and people do it and then como que se apaga, and then comes back up. And there's another renaissance and then it goes. So I think right now we are in a renaissance, like Cloud was saying. And Cloud, I really like the fact that you're looking at it positively and looking at the future, because I think that is what's going to happen. But we have to make it happen. It's not going to happen by the powers that be, who don't have an interest, frankly. We have to make it happen.
Sure. One thing about artists is that they will always find something else to fight about. And I think that there's plenty of schisms out there for different reasons. You have book poets versus spoken word artists. You have those who want to have that independent spirit versus the one like, forget the system, right? So yeah, I think that would just be one more way in which, I don't know how big the schism will be, but it'll just be one more way in which people like don't agree with each other on what they're doing and how they're doing it. And I think that there are some people that are going to be called out and maybe call them vendidos or whatever in this culture, versus people who are like, no, but this is the way I'm the one making it. Maybe you can't, kind of thing. So I think there's a possibility for that. In the end, though, I think that we're a good community and we can get together.
Yeah, just to echo off of that, institutions are flawed. I obviously came from an MFA program, and that was work. And I applaud anyone that went through that does a PhD, especially our people. but it's not the end all be all, and it's not going to create success all the time. That's why those independent DIY publishers are important. And unfortunately, inter-community arguments and schisms happen all of the time, so it's not going to be perfect. And I don't think has to be one or the other, like, fix the big five publishers and it, we'll get more Latinx writers. I think we have to have both, just so that there's more avenues for publishing. With IR, we took the name from the Infrarrealista movement in Mexico, which included Bolaño, and they were a group of poets in the 1970s in Mexico, and they protested Octavio Paz readings, and they were all against the institutions. And so we kind of wanted to take that spirit, but ironically, me and Wanya met in an MFA program. So it's you kind of you're okay, well, you gotta work within the system, unfortunately, sometimes, but it can lead to community and just solidarity. And I think having just more avenues is the goal.
Yeah, I don't think I have a better answer than that. I think it does come down to having, more avenues. I think about I've been thinking about the WGA strike. Are we all familiar with that? Okay. So, and the power of collective bargaining and all of these writers who got together and said, we're not going to cross the picket lines. We're going to be out of work for who knows how long, but we're going to use our collective power to try to, get fairer wages and just, improve our contracts. Right. And I don't know, I've just been thinking about how that could or might ever apply to, poets and fiction writers, nonfiction writers, whether there will ever be an opportunity, for that level of collective action. And again, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what the outcome is, but it's just something I've been kind of mulling over as, keeping up with the WGA stuff.
Yeah, and that reminded me of, we're having a poet come on Tuesday. She's from Laredo, but she works in California. Because of the strike, she was free, so we scheduled it. Of course, now it's over, so she's still coming, and she'll be here on Tuesday at Trinity University. Her name is Josie Nericio, and her book is the Rio Grande anthology, kind of modeled on the Spoonful anthology by masters with the poets, the poems about people who have died. It's beautiful, and there's even a video. If you just Google Rio Grande anthology, Josie Nericio. It's really wonderful, and so she'll be here. And I think that's another way that we kind of foment to not have the schisms, to work across those bridges and to bring people together wherever we are and whoever. Yes, I have people, I know people who work in the industry in New York, and they're doing what they can. And I think, Violeta, you know what I'm talking about, because in Macondo, we bring people from everywhere, and opening up the door for those who come after us, I think is critical. I don't buy that old metaphor of the pot where all they're clawing out and that I don't buy it. That's never happened to me. On the other hand, people have helped me all along. So now I help others. So any other questions or comments? Yes, sir.
I love mentorship, both sides of it. Do you have recommendations for finding either mentors or those to mentor?
Gemini Ink has a mentorship program.
It's going to be relaunched next year. Yeah, we're working on it. We're working on it. Yeah.
That's how I got a mentor. Carmen Toya was in that program. Carmen was my mentor. So that was my official mentor. My unofficial mentor, is because it just happenstance. Not happenstance. It was it's called serendipity. It was serendipity, I think, and that kind of came about because he was a teacher at the same school I was at. And one day he said, "Are you a poet?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I am." So that's how it happened. I think that there are poets and writers, pw.org. Go to that magazine. There's all sorts of submissions and contests and whatnot at that site. That's where I would go.
Yeah, that's a really good resource, is the Poets and Writers website. As for locally, I mean, Gemini Ink is the best in San Antonio. For my organization, we have a youth poet laureate program where we do workshops specifically for Hayes County. So like in the San Marcos area, we just finished up our program for this year, but we're gonna open it again next year. So if y'all know any youth in San Marcos, we welcome them. I think it's also Dripping Springs. So yeah, there's, I mean, plenty of resources out there for mentorship. I know, again, I don't know, Twitter's weird now, but, you know, Twitter used to be a place where I would see people, you know, making calls, like either people who were pretty advanced in their careers who were wanting to pay it forward and get mentors, and they put out calls every so often, or people who were looking for mentorship and they would put out calls. So, you know, I don't know what the success rate would be there, but that's something that I've seen. I also think, you know, speaking of like the youth, depending on, you know, what your qualifications are, what you enjoy doing, like, you know, getting in touch with schools and seeing, you know, how you can participate in, you know, talking to the youth, you know, at schools at different age levels. I've only done it a couple of times, but I found that every time there'll be a couple of students who come up to you afterwards and they, you know, they're wanting that, you know, and so, and I think even if they don't, if they're shy, there's an opportunity if you are working with schools to kind of let them know that you're open to that. This would be.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Yolanda, that from a mentor perspective, I put myself out there. Like AWP has the writer to writer.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that 2 or 3 times, you know, just volunteer. And it's been a beautiful experience. Each time it's been writers not from Texas, and they match really well. So it's just worked out really well. I never had a mentor as such for the creative writing, but I had a lot of friends who wrote. And so we would just kind of mentor each other, I guess. I mean, Sandra was living here in the 80s, and Ana Castillo, just a lot of people that I know, and, you know, just mentoring each other in that way where you read each other's work and you say, no, it's not ready, or why don't you work on this some more? I mean, all kinds of reactions. That's a way of mentoring. But the other part, from my perspective, and you're right, people come up and say, I mean, I know Flores, when I first moved to San Antonio 20 years ago, just out of the blue called me and said, can I come talk to you? I'm a poet. And sure. So we've had a friendship since then. So I think it works both ways. Be a mentor, be mentored. Okay. I think we're going to call it a night. It's 8:02. We went 2 minutes past our time. This has been wonderful. Give yourselves a hand, please. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you. This was such a rich conversation. We have wine and food. Feel free to mingle, talk to our panelists and our moderator. And we just want to let you know that this is kind of what we love to make happen. People talk about issues that are really relevant to like the daily reality of trying to create and write, which is tough on a good day. So just, you know, thank you so much for coming. And, you know, I don't mean to like completely like, you know, plug our programming, but we do help. We want to be here for you. We are your writing arts center. We can't be your writing arts center without you. So just take our programs, talk to the writers, and have some great food. And thank you so much for coming.
I was going to say 2 more things. Thank you, Gemini Ink. Asina, because it's a beautiful collection of how we talk. Asina is how we talk, right? And it is an endangered language because not many people remember the old way of speaking. And I think you're doing a service by publishing it because you're capturing it. And could you tell me how to spell?
I do it when I put it on places. I put TCH hyphen and then like a bunch of A's and maybe an H.
And what about a Vito?
No, you just have to do that.